Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage, and we're going to have them introduce themselves on the first question. So Max, Paolo, and Rafa, please come up. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
So there's been a lot of talk recently about the Bitcoin US ETF, and it's been a long time coming. When, in your opinion, will this be approved, and what will the impact be? And I guess the short version of that question is, are the institutions coming to Bitcoin? I'll also ask you to introduce yourselves as you answer this question. We'll start with you, Rafa.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Raphael Zagury. I'm head of institutional and CIO for Swan. And yeah, absolutely, institutions are coming. We've been as busy as it gets with institutional demand. I think it's a long journey for institutions for understanding Bitcoin and ultimately holding the asset, and that's part of our job. I think everybody here is educators and trying to orange peel them gradually. I think the ETF is definitely going to get approved. Very high likelihood. When it's going to happen, I don't know. I would guess anywhere probably in the beginning of the year. And when it does, I think it's going to be huge for everything, but it's definitely going to be very big for institutions. It creates a solution for a lot of the institutions that have already understood Bitcoin, want to hold Bitcoin, but are still very early in their journey, and they're very used to buying traditional assets. So I think this is a step closer to getting them to ultimately what we believe is what everybody should do, which is hold their own keys and have real Bitcoin that you can see in a blockchain, right? So I think that's a very important step getting there.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paolo Bortolin, Deputy CFO of the City of Lugano, and actually one of the team of the Plan B project. Well, first of all, I would like to say yes, definitely public institution will come, probably sooner than what we think. As City of Lugano, we are coming, we are already there, so we are adopting Bitcoin, maybe not in the custodian way, etc., but we are coming with the payments, but we will talk later on here on this panel. So definitely, I think yes. And for the ETF, they will accept at one point. So I was in Boston a month ago. I really felt that in the US something strong is going on. But there is a push from the top down to freeze everything. But from the bottom, I think there is a big movement that they really want to go on. So I think it will come.
Morning, everyone. My name is Max. I'm CEO of Debify. And yeah, they are coming slowly. But I think the adoption between institutions, among institutions, is actually increasing in the last 6 months. Even the bear market is there still. And regarding ETF, it's going to be a big thing for institutions. For regular Bitcoiners, it's going to be just a price pump, which is also a nice thing. But yeah, the ETF is coming, I think, I'll be a bit more skeptical on that, probably next 12 months, something like that. I wouldn't be very much excited about being approved. I hope I'm wrong, but yeah, we still have time.
Great. So let's talk about the custody situation. At the institutional level, do you expect that collaborative custody will be an option where we have like a multi-institutional, multi-key type arrangement? Or will they be using primarily qualified custodians? And I guess we could work our way back down the line again.
Okay. So I think there's actually could be 3 models in that. First of all, that you mentioned collaborative custody, which is a thing, and there's a solution appearing, like Unchained Capital recently released first batch of not qualified, but custodians who can call that. And there's other solution happening. So that's one of the things. Another thing is like storing Bitcoin with qualified custodian. That's actually a law. Like in US, some of the companies, financial companies, they need to store Bitcoin with qualified custodian. But then there's a third option, where you have collaborative custody between qualified custodians. So they still hold it in a multisig, they all are qualified, and that's kind of a path forward for those institutions who are obliged to store their funds with qualified custodians. So I think that collaborative custody has more potential rather than storing everything with even one qualified custodian, because being a qualified custodian doesn't mean it means that you have a license and certain requirements, but we saw in our space and in traditional finance space, even if you have a license, doesn't mean that you do a proper job.
Working in the public sector, I will say that we will start with qualified custodians, definitely, like we are starting in Switzerland with SDX, Six Digital Exchange. Why? Just because, when you work in the public sector and you have to adopt something like Bitcoin or other digital assets, you have a component that you don't have in the private sector, which is politics. And you have to defend yourself every day on everything you do. So you want to start from a, let's say, very clear and institutional solution to move on later on the decentralized finance and collaborative custodian. So I think starting from qualified custodian is a good thing because you can adopt faster.
Yeah, this is front and center, I think, from a lot of discussions that we have at Swan. Part of me, which is the part that I've been a contributor to open source software for a while, it's been a hobby. So that part of me always looked at all of this and said, forget about all of that. Everybody should hold their own keys. Everybody should have their own hardware wallets, right? Multi-sig, and they should understand that. The reality is that, by having conversations with institutions, the other side of me says exactly this. They'll come to us and they will say, listen, I prefer not to hold Bitcoin than to do that setup. So if we come back to them with a solution that it's a qualified custodian that they understand, they'll probably do that. I don't think that's an ultimate solution. That's not their final solution, but that is better than not holding Bitcoin at all, right? If you think about, for example, pension funds in the US, we see a lot of pension funds that would definitely benefit a lot from having a Bitcoin asset allocation in the long term. That's probably the only way that they can protect against long-term inflation and debasement of money, but they don't hold it at the detriment of their pensioners, right, long term, because of these frictions and these complications. And ultimately, also, it boils down to personal risk. A lot of these managers, they look at it and say, okay, there's a lot of personal risk for me to holding Bitcoin in this non-traditional way. I don't want to take that risk, right? Even if they already made the jump that they understand that Bitcoin is a good asset, right? When you talk about, oh, now you have to hold these keys and have to do all of these things, they definitely are scared away from that. I think, we're starting to see major improvements in the UX, UI of collaborative custody and how to hold the keys and how to manage the keys. I think it's a very important step to, again, ultimately where we want to get. What Unchained just did, great example, I think, that's definitely a good step in the right direction. We're going to have several institutions that hold keys, right? And it would take, they would need to collude between them to actually steal your coins, which is much harder because these are, institutions that have a lot to lose by doing that. But I think, again, that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it seems natural that collaborative custody among institutions would be kind of the final outcome, just that in that it allows you to minimize counterparty risk in a way that using a single qualified custodian does not. But it's going to take time, right? They'll probably stepstone qualified custodian, then institutional collaborative custody.
And Robert, just to that point, I think we're extremely early in Bitcoin, right? We still have no idea what the final shape of all of this is going to look like, right? The same way when the internet started, we didn't know about, all of these things that we would have in our phones, right? I think when we look at Bitcoin, the way we're going to use it, the way we're going to use it as collateral, the way that we use it as an asset, the way we're going to sign keys, it's completely different than anything that we can actually envision right now, because the potential for this is gigantic. It's much bigger than all of that.
Yeah, it's another example of Bitcoin kind of reforming traditional finance, right? It has to adopt itself to accommodate Bitcoin's new features rather than the reverse. Okay, this question I'll pose to everyone, but I think, Paolo, you'll probably have the most to say on it. The city of Lugano is now accepting Bitcoin as a means of payment for both invoices and taxes. What does this mean for Bitcoin adoption, specifically in the public sector?
Sure. Since some time, we already accept Bitcoin and Tether, actually, on our e-government platform online. And then the second step that we announced last year for the full adoption of Bitcoin as a payment mean was to give the citizens and the companies the possibility to pay all the invoices we are issuing every year. We issue more or less 300,000 invoices per year, so it's a quite big number. What happened until now is that, the example we have, like, for instance, the canton of Zug, which is the pioneer in this, they started in 2016, I think, accepting Bitcoin. Today, they accept up to 1.5 million Swiss francs in Bitcoin, which is huge and just amazing. I mean, I love them. They started this way before us, but they do everything manually. So you have to ask them to send a code, and you pay the code, and they get the money, and they register manually in the system. So if you have 200 or 300 payments per year, it's okay. If you issue 300,000 invoices, then you don't want to do it manually, because hopefully if they pay me 10,000 invoices, I have to pay one person to do this. So this is not innovation. This is just advertisement. So I delayed a little bit the project to reach a point where this is all automatic, like you pay your invoice in your bank, so you use the same invoice, and we have the same system, but it's another channel. So this is really adopting Bitcoin in the best way. So Bitcoin now for Lugano is kind of de facto legal tender. You can pay it. I don't see that you pay in Bitcoin. You choose and you do it. Certainly, the good way to go to be really at the top of the adoption will to keep the Bitcoin. This is a kind of big issue. The law says that in Switzerland, actually in Ticino, a municipality cannot speculate. So I cannot invest in options, and I cannot buy 10 million in Bitcoin, keeping it, and just to hope that it goes up. This is speculation. But in my opinion, if somebody pays me 5 million in Bitcoins and I keep the Bitcoin because, I just received it, this is not speculation, because if somebody pays me in euro, I keep it the euro to pay my invoices in euro later on. So why to exchange back and then rechange again the euro to pay that? For the Bitcoin right now, I don't have any supplier who accepted Bitcoin. So once I have many suppliers accepting Bitcoin, then I won't convert it in Swiss franc, keep it in Bitcoin, just as a normal treasury activity, maybe hedging it because of the fluctuation, but that's not a problem. Even the euro fluctuates. Remember, the euro started at 169 against the Swiss francs. Now it's 0.95. So it's fluctuating a lot. So this is just a treasury activity, but we cannot speculate. So we are arriving at this point, but we need a couple of more years, or 3-4 years. Once I have suppliers accepting Bitcoin, which we are building in the other side, then I'm done. I can probably keep some Bitcoin in my balance sheet, but today I can't.
Anything you guys want to add? Views on public sector Bitcoin adoption?
Just had one thing, I think, the speculation is to hold euros, it's not to hold Bitcoin. That's that's the shitcoin at the end of the day, or dollars or whatever, right? But again, to change that mindset, it takes a long time. I think it all starts exactly with that. People have to understand, the managers, the pension funds, allocators, they have to understand where it fits in their portfolio, because they are going to look at Bitcoin as just like being real estate, as being equities, as being another asset class, when it's the base layer of all the asset classes, right? I have a lot of conversations where, public companies will come to us, or endowments, foundations. They're like, oh, we have a very well-diversified portfolio. We have here, assets everywhere. We have assets in different asset classes, different countries, right? And then I ask the question, okay, so how are you diversifying your money, right? And there's no diversification. At the end of the day, it's all based in the same monetary system. In a lot of the cases, it's all based in one currency. It's all in euros or in dollars, right? So there's no diversification there. And that's an asset that it's low, but it's guaranteed to fail in the long term, right?
No, I don't have any comments on the public sector, more into private.
Okay, well, let's go to the next question, which I think you'll have more to say on. So we were describing backstage, the institutional journey is something like institutions first determining they want to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, then determining how exactly they're going to custody the asset, either with qualified custodian, collaborative custody, self-custody, etc. Where are we on this journey today?
I think that most of the institutions are still kind of in the research phase, right? Research and development, probably. We hear a lot from our potential customers that like they have a dedicated person or a team of people who are actually researching and trying to understand how to work with that. But I think one of the things how we can promote Bitcoin among institutions as well is kind of showing them utility, not only just by storing it on the balance sheet in a good custody solution, but also giving them an utility. For example, lending is one of the things that is very useful for institutions. It's non-taxable event in most of the countries. Like if you have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, for example, and at some point you don't want to sell, you want to borrow against that, it's non-taxable event, can help you to add a bit more flexibility to your cash flow. And another interesting thing that you can actually build a proper non-custodial lending solutions with the collaborative custody in place that will look, will feel, and will be onboarding level will be the same that actually with custodial lending. So lending is one of the things that institutions understand. They do understand that kind of business. I think the main problem here is to prove them that Bitcoin is a super collateral and that it's useful. So that's kind of part of education we're missing at the moment, but it's getting there.
From my point of view, education is something very important. As City of Lugano, all we do, including Plan B, is really all about education at the end of the day. I'm speaking with my colleagues of other cities, the cantons. I'm the former treasurer of the Canton of Ticino, which is the regional state, so I'm talking to them. I actually received yesterday an invitation from one of the treasurers I know to go and present Plan B to the treasurer group next year. So this is a big, big advancement because it means they are interested to think what we can do with this, because Lugano is doing it. So education is very important. But at the end of the day, there is something practical. We have to understand that if you have Bitcoins in your balance sheet, probably the bank, if they have a credit line with you, the next year they take a look to your balance sheet and they just shut down your account. This is the place where we are today is like that, not only in Switzerland, everywhere. So adoption of Bitcoin inside of the balance sheet is kind of, a long way to go still.
Yeah, so where are we on the journey? I think that depends. If I would generalize and talk about most of the institutions, they are at square zero. They've just started, right? They have to understand how Bitcoin fits their asset allocation. And shameless plug, but one of the things we've built is called nakamotoportfolio.com. It's a set of open source tools that I got all the tools that I had at Wall Street for asset allocation, for taking a look at portfolios. Institutions, individuals, anybody can go there, can put their asset allocation, because okay, I hold these assets, and then it would simulate different Bitcoin allocations. And I'll tell you, like in all the discussions that we've had with institutions around this, when they see the added benefit of having Bitcoin in their portfolio, they're all shocked, because the first thing that they think about Bitcoin, it's a volatile asset, it's very risky, it doesn't fit my portfolio. They forget the second derivative or an alternative derivative side of this, which is it lacks correlation to the major asset classes. So what that means is that when it is being volatile, it's not being volatile at the same time as the other assets. And in fact, it actually increases your risk-adjusted returns significantly. So when we look at Sharpe ratio, for example, which is a way to look at risk-adjusted returns, and we look at their portfolios, most of the institutions are just, they look at it, they immediately get it. Because I tell them, like, imagine this is not an asset, imagine this is a hedge fund manager. I'm coming to you with these returns, you're allocating to this hedge fund manager, does it fit in your portfolio? And most of them would say absolutely yes, because it is improving the characteristics of my portfolio. So we are at that step. Like most of the discussions we're having, it's exactly on that point. So you can see where it fits in your portfolio, you can see how it fits, and that naturally leads to the next step, which is, okay, I'm convinced that I should have Bitcoin in my portfolio. How do I do it, right? And a lot of them, unfortunately, are going to go to things that are far from ideal, which are like things like GBTC and other things out there. A lot of these are going to go to the ETF, I think, when the ETF is out there. And again, it's part of our job to push them a little bit further. Say, okay, it's good that now you have some Bitcoin in your portfolio, right? At least you're sharing the returns. And positive returns drive everything. So every time that you get another 4-year cycle, price starts going up, right? They are incentivized naturally to move to the next square. And I think the next square for the next cycle is going to be a lot around custody. I think they are going to get orange pill. They're going to see that this is an asset that actually fits in their portfolio. Fortunately or unfortunately, BlackRock is probably going to do a lot of this work for us by telling all their financial advisors that allocate to BlackRock funds that, okay, now I have a Bitcoin ETF, can allocate to this, and that's going to get people interested in Bitcoin, and then we're going to push them to the next point, which is, okay, now that you have the ETF, maybe you should have it in self-custody, right? And they understand that.
So we are at square zero in institutional Bitcoin adoption, hence the importance of education. Let's talk a little bit about non-custodial financial tools for institutions. How is Bitcoin being adopted to this end? This sounds like this is not a square zero topic. So are we far away from institutions using non-custodial financial tools for Bitcoin?
Yeah, it depends what kind of institutions. Again, there's like traditional finance institution, very traditional, and again, there's a square zero because like they need to educate, they need to understand. As soon as ATF there, they will understand the concept probably, hopefully. But there's also hybrid institutions which already kind of have a crypto arm or Bitcoin arm, and again, they have team, they have research development in place, and they kind of start to warming up towards that idea. So I think that two things that are particularly interested in terms of non-custodial stuff for institutions that they can use is first, as I mentioned, lending, because all traditional finance companies understand the lending business. Banks been created because of the lending back in 14th century in Italy, because they were basically lending money towards people who were going abroad, buying the goods and getting back. And another thing is Bitcoin as a super asset in that term that it's tradable 24/7. Under this umbrella goes everything from large OTC deals where you can use a non-custodial setup such as multisig, or just regular trading where you can also use to some extent non-custodial tools, and you can trade day to day, just having earning some little bit profits. But I think that the main thing for institutions will be more conservative approach, lending plus OTC deals just being a long-term investment for the Bitcoin. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I would. The other thing, you just mentioned something. So yesterday I was coming to this panel, so I sent a message to a couple of people that work at Swan. Say, okay, we're going to be talking about institutions. What should we be talking about? And then Tomer, most of you should probably know Tomer. He's phenomenal. So Tomer is a philosopher. So he comes back to me, he writes, Bitcoin is the institution, right? So, which makes 100% sense. It is the ultimate collateral. It is fully transparent. It's 24/7. It has better governance than any company out there. At the end of the day, it's completely transparent. You can run it in your node. You can verify the code, right? It doesn't get much better than that in terms of governance. So I would just say that Bitcoin is the institution at the end of the day. And institutions are definitely coming to Bitcoin.
That's a great point. Bitcoin is a brand new financial institution in and of itself, and it's not one that bends for anyone, so it's bending other institutions to fit it rather than the reverse. So with just a minute left here, I'll just ask an open-ended question. How are regulations changing in regard to Bitcoin? Like, as this adoption is occurring, obviously legal frameworks are being shifted subtly. Are you seeing changes? If so, where and what are they?
Definitely a lot of changes are coming. I think that, if we think at the traditional way of thinking, that first they ignore us, right, and then they fight us, and ultimately they join us. We're definitely on they fight us, right? I think they're looking at Bitcoin, they see it as a threat for several reasons, which we don't need to go into detail. So I think we're a little bit on that. I think there are different politicians, there are different regulators that look at Bitcoin in a different way, but it's part of the educational process as well. I think as soon as they understand that Bitcoin is good for everybody, right? I think regulation is going to go in the right direction. But it's super important to have people like Paolo that really understand, the value of Bitcoin at the end of the day.
And just real quick, if you guys have any views on that.
Yes, I would just say that Switzerland has one of the best legal framework in the world for Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain in general. So we are really lucky because, for instance, Lugano can accept Bitcoin with no limits on the amount, and that's thanks to the regulation we have here.
Yeah, I'll give a short example about the regulation. MiCA is coming to Europe, which is a framework. And from one side, like Cypherpunk inside me says it's bad. But then again, the person who works with institutions, now banks in Europe, has at least clearer framework to work with digital assets. So it's actually, for institutional adoption, these rules are good.
Clearer rules lead to clear path for adoption. So I think that's good. Gentlemen, thank you so much.